Well, most of you are accounting students and you know what an income statement is. It basically, and this is a very sort of sanitized little version of one, it basically shows a snapshot in time of your finances. And so this is a 2010 income statement for the company Creative Ventures. They have some projected revenue. They have some projected variable expenses. They have some projected fixed expenses. And they have some projected summaries going on down here so that they total up the revenue, total up the expenses, and show what they think their net income is going to be. Well, again, this is a finished version, so this company has already played what if. They have made some scenarios. Let me show you those. Scenarios are gotten to through the data tab and the what if scenario group here and scenario manager. And what you'll see is that they have four different scenarios that they've created to help them analyze their data. The first one's called status quo, and that usually means how things are right now. So let's click show and let's see if the numbers changed. I have to close this before I can look. So right now it's showing a net income of 118,625. Let's look at a different scenario. Let's look at if they expanded their operations. Show that. What would that look like? And I will close this and look again. Well, now I'm looking at a net income that's lower, but when a company has expanded operations, they're usually setting themselves up for making more money in the future. Let's see what else they have looked at. Reduced operations. Let's show that. Well, now you can see that that actually takes the bottom line right down. 46,000 in net income. So that's income after expenses. So that doesn't sound like a very good scenario in terms of making a decision. And then I'm not sure what the sale one is. Let's have a peek. Aha, that seems to have affected either how many units sold or how much the unit price was. In all of these cases, what's happening is that changing the values in some of these cells will change the bottom line here. And when you want to see what will happen when you do that, you can set up scenarios. Now, as you can see, it's hard to see what's going to happen with those scenarios, and you certainly can't compare them to each other. So what the scenario manager allows you to do is actually to create a summary. You can create a report, and you can create uh, what's called a summary report. And so what this does is it takes the different scenarios you create and it puts them side by side so that you can see the values compared to each other. So scenarios are good inside the sheet, but they're fantastic to view in a report. What you can see is that it tells you which cells changed and what the changing value became in each of the different scenarios. And of course, businesses are almost always interested in the bottom line, meaning how much money they're going to make. And so what they'd probably look at doing is seeing how does it compare. If I reduce my operations, what's going to happen? If I change the number of units I sell and or the price of those. I think what happened here is they changed both. If you see, they've actually sold more units in this scenario. Here they're selling, let's look at the status quo. Let's compare it against that. 29,000, so not quite 30,000 units. And here they're actually selling more units, but look, the number that they're getting for each unit, 28.50, that's the price per unit, has actually been reduced here. So they're looking at what would happen if I reduce the price of my unit, but I sold a little bit more. And what you can see is it's kind of disaster to the bottom line. So scenarios really help you make good decisions. Let's look at setting some of those up. I'm going to close this spreadsheet and not save it. I'm going to open up one where the scenarios have not yet been created. And we'll do just a couple of simple ones so you can understand the principle of what's happening. When you click on data and then what if, let's see which one's my what if and scenario manager, you'll start out with no scenarios in your. Okay, so now we're going to add a scenario. You can see that there are none in existence in this sheet right now. So I'm going to click add, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to create three scenarios. One to say what I really think is going to happen, One to say what might it look like if things went really badly. I'll call that pessimistic. So my first one I'll call expected. I'll call the second one pessimistic, and I'll call the third one optimistic. What might look like if things went really well that year. So the first thing I do is I name the scenario. And with expected, what I'm going to do is really just capture what's going on in here right now. The Scenario Manager dialog box wants to know which cells are going to be changing. I'll just take that one out. Which cells are going to be changing when you're setting up your scenario and changing the different values. I could just type them in here, or I can click on this button here, which takes me into the spreadsheet and kind of records what I'm doing. So I'm going to say, well, the number of units sold might change, and I'll do a comma. And also the price per unit might change, and I'll do a comma. And then the number of units sold will change depending on how the year goes. So I'll expand that again. So it's showing the three cells that are likely to change depending on what kind of scenario. And I'll say OK. Whoops, let's see. At least one of the changing cells you specify contains a formula. And you're not allowed to use a cell that contains a formula in a scenario. So it's kind of warning you that. I'm probably going to just override it and keep going. So right now you can see that the values that are in these cells are actually here. So it says in B4 I've got 29,200. It's capturing that. And if I wanted to, I could change this right now, but that is what I want to record, is what I really think is going to happen. So this is my expected scenario. Now if I say OK, it's going to close the dialog box, but instead I'm going to say let's add another scenario. So notice that it's already keeping the changing cells, and this one I'm going to call pessimistic. And I am going to say OK, and now it's going to allow me to put in the values that I think could go badly wrong. So for instance, the number of units sold, I could say instead of 29,200, what if I only sold 22,000? And I could keep these other values the same, or I could change them too. So let's change unit price. Let's say the unit price, I can't expect as much. Let's say the market's doing very poorly and I have a lot of competitors. So instead of being able to charge $28.50, let's say I can only charge $25 per unit. And I'll add one last scenario. This one's going to be my optimistic. And I'm going to say OK. I get the warning again. So this time I'm going to say, well, what if things go beautifully? Instead of selling 29,200 units, what if I sold 30,000 units? And what if I didn't charge $28.50 for them, but I actually was able to charge $30 each for these units? So I'll say OK. And actually I didn't use the third cell, the number of units produced. I think that's the one that was the formula, so I just left that alone. So I'm going to click to close this right now. Now you can see that my numbers have not changed because I'm still looking at the numbers that are in there for my expected scenario. Well, now if I want to view the different scenarios, I can go to the Scenario Manager and say, show me what my bottom line would look like in an optimistic year. So right now I think I'm going to net 118,625. And let's see what happens if I show an optimistic year. So notice that it doesn't really look like anything's happened, but it did change the values in those two cells, and it's saying now your bottom line would be 186,425. Lots better. Let's look at pessimistic. I'm going to click pessimistic and show. Ooh, that shows me in the red, meaning I'm losing money to the tune of $163,000. That means that my cost of doing business was so high to produce 22,000 units, and if I can only sell them for $25 each, I'm going to be losing that much money. That would not be a good thing. But isn't it amazing to see that some relatively small changes to your pricing or the number of units you produce can create an entirely different financial picture? And that's exactly what the Scenario Manager is good for. Well, the last thing I want to show you, and I think I'll put it back on expected numbers, is how to create a summary report. When you click Summary, what it's going to ask you to do is do a result cell. Now, we always are interested in the bottom line. If my net income cell B26 had not been selected, I would be selecting it right now because I'm very interested in that. And what you can see is I can do a scenario summary or I can do a scenario pivot table report. We'll do both. I'm going to start with a regular summary report and I'll say OK. Now, this is what the report looks like. It's got the current values that are showing, and they're the same as my expected because that's the scenario I went to before I created the report. Then I've got pessimistic and optimistic. Now, what you'll notice is that B4 and B5 and B9 and B26 don't look nice. These are not nice labels. Instead of putting in the label, it just puts in the absolute cell reference. So if you look at this, B4 is the label for A4 is the label for B4. And so I could say equals A4 in my scenario summary. So I'll go in here and I'll say equals A4. And it, whoops, okay, I guess it's formatted to look like a cell. So I would probably do units sold. And I need to widen this, and I think I need to correct my spelling. Okay, and then here this is going to be price per unit. So I could have sent it over to the other sheet, but I think it's almost easier just to type over. This is, I can't even remember what's in B6. It is, oh, total revenue. Okay, well, that's not what I was trying to do with a scenario manager. I was going to do units produced, but let me have a look here. I think it is units produced. Anyway, units produced. Okay, so you can see I'm fixing these labels, and this one is net income. And that makes this scenario summary report look a lot better. Just seeing some absolute cell references in here is not a very nice way to look at it. Okay, I'm going to go back to my income statement and I'm going to make the pivot table report for you. So I'm going to click summary, and this time I'm going to put in the box here. It's asking for a result cell. I'm going to click here and just make sure it's going to be 26, and it is. And now I say okay, and what it does is puts in again not a very nice label here, which we could fix, and this is going to be income. Actually, it's going to be net income, and this is the scenario name, and it's filtering by all. I don't really have to worry about that, but as you can see, once I've got it in here, I can format the cells, and let's see, I'll decrease the decimal places, and I could even create a chart based on this because, as you know, working with our charts, we can do something that helps us to represent the data a little bit differently there too. So let's have that. Amazing. So here I've got, and I definitely don't need that, here I've got a nice pivot table created, and I can create a chart based on that once I get it in there. Okay, so back to the income statement. So now I've created these three scenarios. I can look at them individually. Better yet, I can look at a report that shows the scenarios side by side so I can compare them. And I can certainly look at my pivot table and see how those are going to look. And by changing a number in here, or in here, I can change how this is going to look. So scenarios are all about analyzing your data so you can make good decisions. Can I increase that price point? How many units do I think I will sell if I do? That kind of thing. And what is ultimately going to be the effect on my bottom line or the net income to my business?